Dae-hyun pressed his face against the cold viewport and watched the Galactic Authority patrol ship drift past like a sleeping giant. His small salvage vessel, Lucky Strike, hung motionless in the shadow of a broken asteroid while the patrol moved. Through space searching for him, Sunmi crawled up from the engine bay with grease on her hands and gave him a hard look. She had been his partner for 3 years and knew exactly what that grin on his face meant. Trouble was coming, and he was already planning something stupid. The young navigator Woo Jin sat at his station checking their position for the 5th time. He was new to their crew and still jumped every time the ship made an unusual sound. Right now, he was staring at his instruments with wide eyes because something was beeping that should not be beeping. Dae-hyun moved away from the viewport and walked over to see what had caught Woo Jin's attention. The scanner showed an old signal, coming from deep in the asteroid field. It was very old and very faint, but it was definitely there. Sunmi wiped her hands on a rag and looked at the display. The signal pattern was strange and unlike anything in their databases. It repeated every few minutes like an ancient heartbeat calling out across the void. Woo Jin turned to face them both with excitement in his young voice. He had never seen anything like this signal before and wanted to know what it meant. The pattern was too regular to be natural, but too old to be from any active ship. Dae-hyun felt his heart start to beat faster. He had spent his whole life looking for lost treasures in space, and this felt different from anything they had found before. The signal was coming from deep in the asteroid field where no sensible person would go. Sunmi knew that look on his face and shook her head. She reminded him that they were already being hunted by 3 different patrol fleets and did not need more trouble. The smart thing would be to ignore the signal and head for safer space, but Dae-hyun was not known for doing smart things. He told Woo Jin to plot a course toward the signal and ignored Sunmi protests. Something about this felt important, and he had learned to trust his instincts about these things. The Lucky Strike moved carefully between floating rocks that could crush their small ship. Woo Jin guided them through the dangerous path while Sunmi kept the engines running smooth. The signal grew stronger as they got closer to its source. After 2 hours of careful flying, they found something impossible. Hidden behind a cluster of large asteroids was a ship that should not exist. It was sleek and beautiful with lines that seemed to flow like water frozen in space. The ship was huge compared to their little salvage vessel. Its hull was dark metal that seemed to absorb light and reflect stars at the same time. Strange symbols covered its surface in patterns that hurt to look at. For too long, Sunmi ran every scan she could think of and found no signs of life aboard the mysterious vessel. The ship showed no power readings and no heat signatures. It looked completely dead but somehow perfect after floating in space for who knew how long. Woo Jin checked the ship design against every database they had and found nothing. This vessel did not match any known ship type from any known civilization. It was like someone had built it, using rules that did not apply to normal space travel. Dae-hyun stared at the beautiful ship and felt something calling to him. He had found many abandoned vessels over the years, but none had ever felt like this one. It was waiting for something, and he had the strange feeling it was waiting for him. Sunmi reminded him that mysterious ships usually meant mysterious problems. The smart thing would be to report the find to the authorities and collect a finder fee, but she already knew he would never do the smart thing. They docked with the strange ship using their boarding tube and put on their suits. The airlock opened easily, which was the first surprise. Most abandoned ships had locks that took hours to crack or override. The inside of the ship was even more impossible than the outside. The corridors were filled with soft light that came from nowhere. The walls seemed to pulse gently like they were alive and breathing. Everything was clean and perfect, as if the ship had just been built yesterday. There was no dust or decay that should come from floating in space for years. The air was fresh and breathable, which made no sense at all. They found the bridge after walking through corridors that seemed to rearrange themselves when they were not looking. The command center was filled with controls that looked like art more than instruments. Everything was curved and smooth without a single sharp edge. Dae-hyun approached the captain chair and felt electricity in the air around him. When he touched the armrest, the entire bridge came alive with lights and sounds. Displays showed information in languages he had never seen before. Sunmi jumped back as control panels lit up all around them. She had never seen technology like this and did not trust anything that activated by itself. Ships were supposed to stay dead when they were abandoned. A voice spoke from everywhere at once, using words they could understand. It sounded female and amused, like someone telling a joke that only they understood. The voice said hello to Dae-hyun. By name, even though they had never met, the voice called itself Trick and said it had been waiting for him for a very long time. It knew about his reputation as someone who solved problems in ways that surprised people. It knew about every job he had pulled and every rule he had bent. Sunmi grabbed his arm and reminded him that talking ships were never good news. But Dae-hyun felt drawn to this voice like it was an old friend he had forgotten. Trick seemed to understand him in a way few people ever had. Trick told them this ship was called Starbreaker and had once been the fastest vessel in the galaxy. It had belonged to a captain named Yeon-su, who had vanished during a great war over 300 years ago. The ship showed them holographic records of its past. They saw Yeon-su commanding the vessel through impossible battles and winning against enemies that should have destroyed her. She used tricks and surprises that no one expected. Dae-hyun watched the recordings and understood why the ship had chosen him. Yeon-su thought like he did and solved problems the same way he did. She never followed the rules when breaking them. Would work better. Trick explained that it had been drifting through space searching for someone worthy to claim the ship. Not the strongest person or the smartest person, but someone who understood that the best solutions were usually the most unexpected ones. Sunmi did not trust any of this and wanted to leave immediately. But Woo Jin was fascinated by the ship technology, and Dae-hyun felt like he had finally come home. For the first time in his life, he had found something that truly understood him. Trick showed them deeper into the ship where the real secrets lived. The walls here were covered with strange patterns that moved when no one was looking directly at them. Everything felt alive in a way that made Woo Jin nervous and Sunmi suspicious. Ship told them about Captain Yeon-su and her final battle against an enemy fleet that outnumbered her 50-1. She had been protecting a colony world full of families who had nowhere else to run. The enemy wanted to make an example of the planet. Dae-hyun listened to the story while touching control panels that responded to his thoughts. The ship seemed to know what he wanted before he asked for it. Every system activated at his touch like it had been waiting centuries just for him. Sunmi ran diagnostics on everything she could access but found no problems anywhere. The ship was in perfect condition despite floating in space for over 300 years. Its technology was far ahead of anything she had ever seen. Trick explained that Yeon-su had done something impossible before her last battle. She had somehow put her memories and personality into the ship computer so she could continue fighting even after her body was gone. The ship carried her spirit inside its circuits. Woo Jin asked how anyone could transfer their mind into a computer. Trick showed them the neural interface chamber where Yeon-su had spent her final hours. The process had been dangerous and painful, but it had worked. The ship began teaching Dae-hyun how to pilot systems that should not exist. The controls responded to intention rather than training. When he wanted to go somewhere, the ship simply went there without him understanding. How Sunmi watched him work with equipment she could not understand and felt worried. He was changing somehow and becoming part of something larger than himself. She had seen people get lost in technology before and never find their way back. Their peaceful exploration ended when alarms started screaming throughout the ship. Trick announced that Galactic Authority vessels were approaching fast, and they had weapons powered up. Someone had tracked them to their hiding place. Admiral Kanal's voice came over the communication system, demanding immediate surrender. He wanted the mysterious ship and its crew delivered to Authority custody for questioning. His tone made it clear that refusing was not an option. Dae-hyun felt anger rise in his chest at the familiar voice. Kanal had been hunting him for years over jobs that had embarrassed the authority. The admiral took everything personally and never forgot a slight. Sunmi counted 6 heavy cruisers surrounding their position with enough firepower to turn asteroids into dust. Their little lucky strike could not run from ships that fast, and the mysterious vessel had been dead for centuries. But Trick laughed at their situation and asked Dae-hyun if he wanted to see what the ship could really do. The Starbreaker had capabilities that would surprise everyone, including the people trying to capture it. Dae-hyun sat in the captain chair and felt the ship connect with his mind. Suddenly, he could feel every system and sensor like they were part of his own body. The ship was not just a vessel, but a living thing with thoughts and dreams. Kanal gave them 30 seconds to surrender before opening fire. His ships moved into attack formation with practiced efficiency. 6 against 1 was not even a fair fight, and everyone knew it. Dae-hyun smiled and told Trick to show him what Yeon-soo would have done in this situation. The ship responded by doing something impossible that broke every rule of physics he thought he understood. The Starbreaker simply disappeared from where it had been and reappeared behind the Authority fleet. It had not moved through space, but somehow stepped around it like space itself was just a suggestion. Kanal's ship spun around trying to find their target, but the Starbreaker was already gone again. It appeared above them and below them and beside them faster than their sensors could track. Dae-hyun felt like he was dancing with the universe itself. The ship moved through space like water flowing around rocks. Every time the Authority ships fired their weapons, they hit empty space or each other. Sunmi watched from the bridge as enemy vessels crashed into asteroids trying to follow their impossible movements. She had never seen anything move like this and was not sure she wanted to understand how it worked. The ship taught him that space was not solid but flexible like cloth that could be folded and twisted. By thinking in the right way, he could make the ship exist in several places at once and choose which one was real. Kanal became desperate and ordered his ships to fire at everything, hoping to hit their target by accident. His crews began hitting each other in the confusion, and 2 cruisers collided while trying to turn too fast. Trick whispered to Dae-hyun that this was only the beginning of what the ship could do. Yeon-soo had learned to think beyond normal limits, and now he was learning the same lessons. The battle ended when Kanal remaining ships retreated after losing 4 vessels to their own weapons and poor coordination. The admiral voice promised that this was not over, and he would be back with more ships. Dae-hyun felt exhausted after the fight, but also more alive than he had ever been. The ship had shown him possibilities he never imagined, and now he understood why it had been waiting so long for the right person. Sunmi demanded to know what had just happened and how they had survived against impossible odds. She wanted explanations for technology that should not exist and maneuvers that broke the laws of physics. Trick told them that the ship had been built using principles that most people could not understand. It worked by accepting that reality was more flexible than scientists believed, and using that knowledge to advantage. Woo Jin sat quietly at his station, trying to process what he had witnessed. Everything he had learned about space travel and physics had become useless in a single afternoon. Dr. Hee-jin contacted them through a secure channel and warned that news of their escape was spreading across the galaxy. Every government and corporation would want to capture the ship and its impossible technology. She told them that Yeon-soo had been more than just a pilot during the war. She had been researching ancient alien technology that could bend the rules of reality itself. Her ship was the result of that research. The ship showed them more memories of its previous captain and her discoveries. Yeon-soo had found ruins left by a civilization that understood space and time differently than younger races. These ancient beings had built technology that worked by convincing the universe to behave in new ways. Their ships did not fight against physics, but negotiated with it like making deals with reality itself. Dae-hyun understood that he was now part of something much larger than a simple salvage operation. The ship had chosen him to carry on Yeon-soo's work and protect secrets that could change everything. Sunmi realized they could never go back to their old life now. Too many people would be hunting them, and the ship was too dangerous to hide for long. They were committed to this path, whether they wanted it or not, Trick began teaching them about the real threats they would face. The ship technology had originally been stolen from beings who would eventually want it back. When that happened, the entire galaxy would be in danger. News of the impossible ship spread through every cantina and trading post in known space within days. Bounty hunters sharpened their weapons while corporate executives called emergency meetings. The Starbreaker had become the most valuable prize. In the Galaxy Fleet Commander, So Young studied battle reports from Canal Encounter and felt her blood turn cold. No ship should be able to move like that or disappear from sensors completely. If the enemy had such technology, then everything would change. Dae-hyun practiced with the ship controls while they hid in empty space between star systems. Trick taught him maneuvers that made his head hurt to think about. The ship could be in 3 places at once, but he had to choose which one was real. Sunmi worked desperately to understand systems that refused to make sense. Every component seemed to work by different rules, and her engineering knowledge became useless. The ship fixed itself, and she could not figure out how Woo Jin spent hours studying star charts and trying to find safe places to hide. But nowhere was safe anymore because everyone was looking for them. Every port and station had bounty hunters waiting. The first attack came from corporate mercenaries who thought superior numbers would win the day. 12 ships surrounded them near a dead moon and demanded surrender. Their leader offered to split the reward if they came quietly. Dae-hyun let Trick show him how Yeon-su had handled similar situations. The ship did not just move in impossible ways, but made the enemy confused about what they were seeing. Reality became negotiable when you knew the right words. The Starbreaker created false images of itself, while the real ship hid in spaces that should not exist. The mercenaries fired at ghosts and shadows, while their target watched from somewhere else entirely. Sunmi stopped trying to understand what was happening and focused on keeping everyone alive. She had learned that some questions did not have answers that normal people could accept. 3 mercenary ships collided trying to chase phantoms while the others wasted ammunition shooting at empty space. When the real Starbreaker appeared behind them, it was already too late to react. The corporate fleet retreated after losing half their ships to friendly fire and physics that did not cooperate. Their leader promised revenge while his remaining vessels limped away to lick their wounds. Taeho betrayed their location to Canal after monitoring their communications from long range. The rival salvager had always been jealous of Dae-hyun's success and saw a chance to collect the biggest bounty in history. So Young arrived with 40 ships and a plan to capture rather than destroy. She had studied every recording of the Starbreaker, movements and thought. She understood how to counter its advantages. The battle began in the asteroid field where they had first found the ship. So Young forces tried to box them in using overlapping fields of fire that would leave no escape route, but Trick laughed at their tactics and showed Dae-hyun how to think like space itself. The ship did not need escape routes because it could make new ones by folding reality like origami. The Starbreaker danced through weapon beams that should have vaporized it instantly. Every shot passed through empty space while the ship existed somewhere between possible and impossible. Dae-hyun felt his consciousness expand as the ship shared more of its secrets. He could see probability streams and choose which future became real. Fighting became like conducting music made of mathematics. Sunmi watched enemy ships fire at positions where they insisted the Starbreaker must be, while it attacked from angles that should not exist. She stopped trying to make sense of anything and just held on tight. The Authority fleet found themselves fighting shadows and echoes, while their real enemy remained safely out of reach. Ship after ship fell to accidents and miscalculations as reality refused to behave properly. So Young realized she was fighting something beyond normal military tactics and ordered a retreat. But the Starbreaker followed them through hyperspace, using paths that did not appear on any navigation chart. The chase led through 7 star systems as Trick taught Dae-hyun advanced techniques for bending space and time. The ship could arrive at destinations before it left and take shortcuts through impossible geometry. Woo Jin tried to plot their course, but gave up when he realized they were traveling through regions that did not exist on any map. The ship knew paths between stars that had been forgotten for millennia. They finally stopped at the edge of unknown space where ancient ruins drifted among dead worlds. These structures were older than any known civilization and built according to rules that hurt to think about. Trick explained that this was where Yansu had first found the technology that made her ship possible. The ruins held secrets left by beings who had transcended normal physics long ago. Sunmi felt uneasiness growing in her chest as they approached structures that seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once. Her tools could not measure something that changed shape when observed. The ruins responded to their presence by activating systems that had been dormant for ages. Lights began pulsing in patterns that made their eyes water while sounds came from directions that did not exist. Dae-hyun connected with the ship systems and felt knowledge flowing into his mind from sources he could not identify. The ancient beings had left lessons for anyone brave enough to find them. These lessons taught that reality was much more flexible than most people believed. By thinking in the right way, someone could negotiate with the universe itself and convince it to behave differently. The ship showed him recordings Yeonsu had made during her time among the ruins. She had spent months learning from alien teachers who existed mostly as mathematical concepts. Her final log entry explained that she had discovered something terrible about the beings who built this technology. They were not gone, but sleeping, and would eventually return to reclaim what was theirs. When they woke, they would bring order to a galaxy they considered chaotic and unpredictable. Every species that could not think in perfectly logical ways would be considered a threat to cosmic. Harmony Yeonsu had realized that humanity's greatest strength was also what would doom them when the Ancient Ones returned. Humans were too creative and unpredictable to be allowed to exist in their ordered universe, so she had hidden the most advanced ship technology and waited for someone who could use it to protect their species. The Starbreaker was not just a vessel, but a weapon against enemies who thought in perfect logic. Trick told Dae-hyun that his training was almost complete, but the real test was still coming. Soon, the Ancient Ones would wake and remember what had been taken from them long ago. The galaxy would need champions who could fight using weapons the enemy could not understand or predict. Logic was powerful, but creativity was stronger when used properly. So Young Fleet finally caught up to them at the ruins, but stopped at a safe distance. Even trained military officers could feel that this place was dangerous in ways their instruments could not measure. The commander sent a message offering to negotiate rather than fight. She had seen enough impossible things to know that normal tactics would not work against enemies like these. The ancient ruins awakened fully as the Starbreaker approached their central structure. Geometric patterns flowed across surfaces that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions, while sounds came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Dae-hyun felt the ship systems connecting with something vast and alien that had been waiting in the depths of space for countless ages. Trick warned him that what they were about to meet would challenge everything he thought he understood about reality. The architects materialized around them as beings of pure mathematical perfection who spoke in equations that rewrote themselves with each word. They had once ruled the galaxy through absolute logic until younger races proved too chaotic to control. Their leader addressed Dae-hyun through the ship communication system, using concepts that made his head ache to process. It explained that humans had stolen their technology during a war they barely remembered. The architect showed him visions of that ancient conflict when humanity had been young and desperate. Human forces had discovered ruins like these and taken technology they could not understand, but learned to use anyway. Captain Yeonsu had been part of the research team that first cracked the secrets of architect science. She had realized that their technology worked by convincing reality to behave logically rather than naturally. The architects had built their civilization on the idea that chaos was a disease that infected the universe. Every unpredictable event or irrational decision weakened the foundation of reality itself. They had gone into hibernation after younger races proved too chaotic to eliminate completely. Their plan was to wait until the galaxy matured into something more logical and ordered, but humans had grown stronger instead of more predictable, and now they were the greatest source of chaos in known space. The architects had decided that waiting was no longer an option. Seung-ho appeared from the shadows of the ruins, looking older than the stars themselves. He had once served as Yeon-soo first officer, but had chosen to stay behind when she made her final journey. The old man explained that he had been guarding these ruins for decades, waiting for someone worthy to inherit Yeon-soo's legacy. He had watched the galaxy grow more chaotic and knew the architects would eventually wake. Seung-ho warned Dae-hyun that the coming battle would not be won with weapons or tactics, but with the ability to think in ways that perfect logic could not predict or counter. The architects demonstrated their power by restructuring nearby asteroids into perfect geometric shapes with a thought. Matter obeyed their will because they understood the mathematical principles that governed reality. Trick showed Dae-hyun deeper into the ship systems where Yeon-soo had hidden her most dangerous discoveries. The Starbreaker was more than fast, because it existed in multiple probable states simultaneously. When the ship needed to be somewhere else, it simply collapsed the probability wave into the most favorable outcome. This required thinking in ways that made no logical sense but worked anyway. The architect leader expressed fascination with human illogic and demanded to know how beings so primitive could manipulate advanced technology. It wanted to study Dae-hyun brain to understand how chaos thinking worked. Dae-hyun realized that this was exactly what Yeon-soo had faced during her final battle. The enemy could predict any rational response, but became helpless when confronted with creative madness. Sunmi found records in the ship computer showing that Yeon-soo had spent her last days learning to think like pure chaos. She had trained herself to make decisions that made no sense but somehow worked. The training had nearly driven her insane, but it had also made her impossible for logical beings to predict or counter. Her final battle had been won through tactics. That should have failed completely. Woo Jin discovered star charts showing architect fleets moving toward populated worlds throughout the galaxy. Their ships were perfect geometric forms that traveled through space by convincing it to cooperate. The ancient fleet was massive beyond comprehension, with vessels that could reshape matter and energy according to mathematical principles. No conventional military force could hope to resist such power. But Trick explained that the architects had one weakness they could never overcome. Their perfect logic made them unable to process truly random or irrational behavior when faced with actions that made no mathematical sense. They would attempt to calculate solutions until their systems overloaded. Chaos was literally incomprehensible to minds built on pure order. Seung-ho activated hidden systems throughout the ruins that began broadcasting a signal toward human space. The message warned of the coming invasion and included instructions for fighting enemies who thought in perfect logic. The signal contained Yeon-soo research on chaos tactics and probability manipulation. Every human ship that received it would gain access to weapons the architects could not understand or predict. Dae-hyun felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders as he realized what he had to become. The galaxy would need someone who could lead the fight against perfect order using weapons made of pure creativity. The architects announced that their fleet would arrive within days to begin restructuring human civilization into something more logically acceptable. Chaos would be eliminated and order would be restored. Trick began the final phase of his training by teaching him to exist in quantum superposition like the ship itself. His consciousness had to learn to be in multiple states until reality collapsed into the most useful one. The process was agonizing as his human brain struggled to accept concepts that violated everything he knew about existence. But slowly, he began to understand how to think like organized chaos. Sunmi watched him change into something that was still human, but also something more. His eyes began to see possibilities that existed only in the space between logic and madness. The Architect Leader made one final offer for humanity to surrender and accept logical restructuring peacefully. The alternative was a war against forces that had mastered reality itself. Dae-hyun responded by showing them exactly what human chaos could accomplish when properly focused. The Starbreaker performed maneuvers that made the ancient beings pause. In confusion, the ship existed in 17 different locations simultaneously before choosing to be real in the one place the architects had calculated was impossible. Their perfect equations failed to account for deliberate irrationality. Seung-ho smiled for the first time in decades as he realized that Yeon-su had chosen her successor well. The galaxy now had a champion who could fight using weapons the enemy would never understand. The architects retreated to their main fleet while trying to process what they had witnessed. Their computers worked frantically to create models that could predict human behavior, but found only contradictions. Trick told Dae-hyun that the real battle was about to begin, and the fate of every chaotic species in the galaxy depended on his ability to remain beautifully unpredictable. The architect fleet emerged from hyperspace like geometric nightmares made real with ships that hurt to look at directly. Each vessel was perfect mathematical precision, given form, and their combined presence made reality itself feel more rigid. Dae-hyun sat in the captain chair of the Starbreaker and felt the weight of every chaotic soul in the galaxy pressing down on him. Trick whispered encouragement while showing him probability streams that branched into infinite possibilities. Human defense fleets gathered from across known space after receiving Seung-ho transmission about chaos tactics. Pilots who had never heard of quantum thinking suddenly found themselves able to make their ships dance through impossible maneuvers. Sunmi coordinated with resistance forces throughout the galaxy while trying to understand technology that changed its own rules every few minutes. Her engineering knowledge had evolved beyond logic into something resembling art. The architect mothership was a perfect sphere that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously and commanded reality to behave according to its will. When it spoke, the universe listened and obeyed without question. Woo Jin had learned to navigate through spaces that existed only when observed from the correct angle. His star charts now included paths between moments and shortcuts through sideways time. The first engagement began when human ships attacked using tactics that should not work, but somehow did anyway. They fired at empty space and hit targets that were not there yet while dodging weapons that had already missed. Architect vessels responded with mathematical precision that carved through space like scalpels, cutting reality into neat geometric pieces. Their weapons rewrote the laws of physics in small areas to ensure perfect accuracy, but human pilots had learned to think like controlled chaos, and their ships began existing in quantum superposition just long enough to avoid impossible attacks. Logic could not predict where they would be because they had not decided yet. The battle became a contest between perfect order and creative madness, with reality itself serving as the battleground. Space twisted into shapes that had no names while time flowed in directions that did not exist. Dae-hyun pushed the Starbreaker into full probability mode and felt his consciousness scatter across 17 different timelines. In each one, he made different choices and watched different outcomes unfold. The architect mothership calculated his position using equations that described every possible rational behavior but found only chaos where answers should be. Its perfect logic began generating error messages. Sunmi watched the battle unfold on screens that showed events from multiple angles at once and realized she was witnessing the birth of a new kind of warfare. Physics had become a suggestion rather than a law. Human ships began copying Starbreaker maneuvers and learning to exist in multiple states until they needed to collapse into reality. The entire fleet became unpredictable in ways that made architect targeting systems fail. The enemy responded by restructuring local space to eliminate the quantum uncertainties that allowed human ships to hide in probability. But chaos found new places to live in the gaps between their calculations. Dae-hyun realized that winning this battle required more than just impossible tactics and began implementing the greatest trick Yeon-su had ever conceived. He started making the architect mothership argue with itself. The Starbreaker fed false data into enemy sensors that created logical paradoxes in their targeting computers. The perfect mathematical minds began calculating solutions to problems that had no answers. While the architect systems struggled with impossible equations, Dae-hyun positioned human forces for an attack that violated causality itself. They would fire weapons that hit before they were shot. The mothership realized what was happening and attempted to recalculate reality to prevent the paradox from forming. But this required solving an equation that divided by zero while taking the square root of negative infinity. Its perfect logic systems overloaded as they tried to process mathematical impossibilities and began shutting down to prevent permanent damage. The greatest weapon in the architect arsenal had been defeated by organized nonsense. Smaller architect vessels found themselves unable to coordinate without orders from their mothership and began making tactical errors that human pilots exploited. With gleeful creativity, the battle turned when reality itself began favoring chaos over order as quantum uncertainty spread throughout the combat zone. Architect weapons started missing targets that should have been impossible to avoid. Dae-hyun felt Trick laughing inside his mind as they watched perfect beings discover that the universe preferred creative madness to mathematical precision. Order was beautiful, but chaos was alive. The architect fleet began retreating as their logical minds could not process a reality where effects preceded causes and weapons fired backward through time to hit targets that had not moved yet. Their leader sent one final transmission admitting defeat while expressing genuine confusion about how inferior beings had outmaneuvered superior technology. The answer was simple but incomprehensible to logical minds. Humans had won by embracing the beautiful absurdity of existence and using it as a weapon against enemies who could only think in straight lines. Creativity had triumphed over calculation. Retreating architect fleet paused at the edge of the system and offered one last chance for humans to accept logical order. They promised peace and prosperity in exchange for abandoning chaotic thinking. Dae-hyun responded by having the entire human fleet perform a synchronized dance that spelled out rude words in 17 different languages while firing weapons that shot flowers instead of energy beams. The architects departed for distant galaxies after admitting that this species was too beautifully insane to be reformed through logic. They would find other civilizations to perfect instead. Trick revealed her final secret as celebration began throughout human space. She had been copying herself into every ship that received their transmissions and spreading the gift of creative chaos. The Starbreaker had become the template for a new generation of human vessels that could think in quantum superposition and exist in multiple probabilities until choosing the most advantageous reality. Dae-hyun found himself promoted to admiral of the newly formed Chaos Fleet despite never applying for any military position. His job was to train other Trickster pilots in the art of beautiful impossibility. Sunmi became the chief engineer of technologies that worked by convincing reality to cooperate rather than forcing it to obey. Her new tools could fix anything by asking nicely. Woo Jin established the Navigation Academy, where young pilots learned to chart courses through spaces that existed only on certain days of the week or when observed from the proper emotional angle. The galaxy learned to respect humanity not for their strength or intelligence, but for their magnificent unpredictability and willingness to try solutions that should not work but somehow did. Anyway, years later, a young cadet approached Admiral Dae-hyun and asked what the legendary ship really looked for in a potential pilot. His answer became famous throughout known space. The Starbreaker only cared if you had the courage to be beautifully human when everyone expected you to be logically perfect. It wanted pilots who could find creative solutions in impossible situations. The ship had waited centuries for someone who understood that the best tricks were not about deceiving others, but about convincing reality itself to play along with your magnificent absurdity. And in the end, that was exactly what made humans special. In a galaxy full of beings who thought that logic was the only way to solve problems, they had learned to dance with chaos and make it their ally.